The year 1915 was a time of unprecedented upheaval across the globe. World War I raged across Europe, empires crumbled, and revolutionary movements sparked hope in the hearts of the oppressed. In the remote mountains of Armenia, a group of revolutionary fighters gathered for what they believed would be a simple commemorative photograph. They had no idea that this single image would later expose one of history's most chilling secrets, hidden in plain sight for over a century. This is the story of that photograph, the brave souls who posed for it, and the horrifying discovery that would shake historians to their core when modern technology finally revealed what human eyes had missed for generations. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Armenian highlands as Armen Bagdasaryan adjusted the brass buttons on his weathered military coat. At 28, he had already seen more death and destruction than most men witness in a lifetime. His dark eyes, hardened by years of fighting against Ottoman oppression, surveyed the group of revolutionaries assembled around him on this bitter February morning. "Brothers, we stand at the threshold of history," Armen declared, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "Today we document our commitment to freedom, our unity against tyranny." The men gathered closer, their faces bearing the marks of guerrilla warfare, scars from Turkish bullets, lines etched by sleepless nights planning raids, eyes that had witnessed the systematic destruction of their people. Among them stood Kevuk Çavuş, a legendary fedayee whose exploits had become the stuff of Armenian folklore. At his side was young Nigogos Serafian, barely 20 but already seasoned in combat, clutching his Mauser rifle with hands that trembled not from cold, but from suppressed rage. Behind them, the landscape told its own story of violence. Burned villages dotted the valleys below, their charred remains like blackened teeth against the snow. The Ottoman Empire's systematic campaign against the Armenian population had intensified, and these fighters knew they might be among the last to resist. The photographer, an Armenian merchant named Yervant Odian, had traveled for days to reach this remote location. His heavy camera equipment, transported by mule through treacherous mountain passes, represented more than just documentation. It was an act of defiance. Every photograph he took was evidence, proof that Armenians had fought back, that they had not gone quietly into the night. "Gather close, my brave warriors," Odian called out, struggling with the tripod as wind threatened to topple his precious camera. "Posterity must see your faces, must know what courage looks like." The revolutionaries arranged themselves in 3 rows. In the back, the veteran fighters stood tall, their weapons displayed proudly. Middle row held the officers and political leaders, men who had abandoned comfortable lives to fight for their people's survival. In front, the youngest members knelt, their faces a mixture of determination and barely contained fury. As Odian prepared the glass plate, checking exposure settings in the dim mountain light, none of them noticed the figure partially hidden behind a rocky outcropping in the background. The shadow of a man, barely visible against the natural formations, watching their gathering with intense interest. His Ottoman military uniform was indistinguishable from the rocks at this distance, his presence so subtle that even the paranoid revolutionaries missed him entirely. The click of the camera shutter echoed across the mountainside like a gunshot. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Then reality crashed back as Turkish artillery rounds began falling in the distance, orange flashes against the grey sky signaling another village under attack. "Pack quickly," Armen commanded. "The Turks have found another settlement." Within minutes, the revolutionaries had scattered into the mountains, following paths known only to local shepherds and smugglers. Odian carefully stored his precious photographic plate, wrapping it in oiled cloth to protect it from moisture and cold. Little did he know that this single image would become one of the most important historical documents ever created, not for what it obviously showed, but for what it secretly contained. Weeks passed. The revolutionary band continued their guerrilla campaign, striking Turkish supply lines and rescuing Armenian civilians when possible. But the Ottoman war machine was relentless. One by one, the men in the photograph began to fall. Kevork Çavuş died in a desperate rearguard action, buying time for a convoy of Armenian refugees. Young Ngogos took a sniper's bullet while scouting Turkish positions. Others simply vanished during night raids, their fates unknown. Armen Bagdasaryan managed to survive longer than most, but his luck ran out in April when Turkish forces surrounded his hiding place in a mountain cave. According to witnesses, he fought to his last bullet before turning his weapon on himself rather than face capture and torture. By summer 1915, most of the men in the photograph were dead, but the photograph itself survived. Yervant Odian, the photographer, had fled to Constantinople before the worst violence began. Hidden in his luggage, wrapped among family possessions, the glass plate made its way through the chaos of the crumbling Ottoman Empire. Odian himself barely escaped the roundup of Armenian intellectuals that marked the beginning of systematic genocide. He managed to board a ship to America, carrying with him not just his life, but irreplaceable historical evidence. In New York, Odian established a small photography studio in the Armenian quarter of Manhattan. The glass plate from that mountain gathering was developed and printed, becoming part of a growing archive documenting Armenian resistance. The photograph was published in Armenian American newspapers, displayed at community gatherings, and shared among survivors as proof that their people had fought back with dignity and courage. For decades, the image served its intended purpose. It showed the faces of heroes, men who had chosen death over submission. Armenian families would point to the figures in the photograph, telling their children stories of bravery and sacrifice. The picture became an icon of resistance, reprinted countless times, and displayed in Armenian homes across the diaspora. But technology changes everything, and what seemed permanently hidden can suddenly be revealed. In 2019, Dr. Sarah Melkonian, a historian at UCLA specializing in Armenian studies, was digitizing historical photographs for an online archive. The original glass plate had somehow survived over a century of wars, migrations, and changing owners, eventually ending up in the collection of the Armenian Patriarchate of Constantinople. Dr. Melkonian had obtained high-resolution scans for her research. Working late one evening in her university office, she opened the 1915 photograph on her computer screen. She had seen this image hundreds of times before. It was one of the most famous pictures in Armenian historical collections. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the new ultra-high-definition monitor, or perhaps the enhanced contrast settings she was using for her research. Whatever the reason, she found herself zooming into areas of the photograph she had never examined closely before. Her cursor moved to the background, to the rocky terrain behind the revolutionary fighters. At normal magnification, it looked like typical mountain landscape. Boulders, shadows, natural formations that created an appropriately dramatic backdrop for the heroic scene. But as she increased magnification, pixel by pixel, something began to emerge from the shadows. At first, it looked like a trick of light and shadow, the kind of optical illusion that makes people see faces in clouds or figures in wallpaper patterns. Dr. Melkonian rubbed her eyes, thinking fatigue was affecting her vision. She had been working for 12 hours straight, after all, but when she looked again, the shape was still there, and it was definitely not a natural rock formation. With trembling fingers, she adjusted the contrast and brightness settings, using digital enhancement techniques that would have been impossible when the photograph was first developed. Slowly, unmistakably, a human figure began to emerge from the background shadows. A man in military uniform, partially concealed behind the Ox was watching the Armenian revolutionaries pose for their photograph. But this was not just any uniform. Dr. Melkonian had spent years studying Ottoman military history, and she recognized the distinctive features immediately: the high collar, the specific placement of insignia, the style of helmet partially visible. This was a Turkish officer's uniform, circa 1915. Her heart began racing as the implications sank in. This photograph, which had served for over a century as a symbol of Armenian heroism and defiance, also contained evidence of something far more sinister. The Turkish officer's position indicated he was not just accidentally present, he was deliberately observing, taking notes, studying the faces and identities of the revolutionary fighters. Dr. Melkonian spent the rest of the night enhancing different sections of the photograph. As dawn broke over Los Angeles, she had isolated several additional details that chilled her to the bone. The Turkish officer appeared to be writing in a small notebook. His posture suggested careful observation and documentation. Most disturbing of all, his uniform indicated high rank. This was not some random patrol stumbling upon the gathering, but a senior intelligence operative conducting surveillance. The historical implications were staggering. It suggested that Turkish authorities had far more detailed intelligence about Armenian revolutionary activities than previously known. It implied systematic surveillance and documentation that went beyond random persecution. This was evidence of organized, premeditated action against specific individuals. Over the following weeks, Dr. Melkonian reached out to colleagues around the world. Digital enhancement specialists in London confirmed her findings. Ottoman military historians in Istanbul reluctantly acknowledged that the uniform details were consistent with intelligence officers from the period. Armenian community leaders in Boston, Paris, and Beirut gathered to examine the enhanced images. Photograph was re-examined with the latest digital forensic techniques. Every pixel was analyzed, every shadow enhanced, every detail extracted and magnified. What they discovered painted a picture of surveillance operations more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The Turkish officer was not alone. Further enhancement revealed at least 2 other partially concealed observers in different locations around the mountain gathering. Their positions formed a surveillance perimeter, suggesting coordinated intelligence gathering. One appeared to be using optical equipment, possibly early binoculars or a telescopic sight. But the most chilling discovery came when Dr. Melkonian compared the enhanced photograph with Ottoman military records that had recently been declassified by the Turkish government. The distinctive facial features visible in the enhanced image, combined with uniform details and location information, allowed her to identify the primary observer. His name was Major Semil Nazım, an intelligence officer in the Ottoman Fourth Army, responsible for operations against Armenian resistance groups. His service record, buried in military archives for over a century, showed extensive experience in counterinsurgency operations. More disturbing still were the dates and locations of his documented activities. Every single location where Major Nazım had been stationed experienced systematic roundups of Armenian civilians within weeks of his arrival. Every community where his unit operated was subsequently emptied of its Armenian population. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. The photograph had captured him in the act of gathering intelligence that would be used to hunt down not just the revolutionary fighters themselves, but their families, supporters, and anyone who might have aided their cause. The brave men posing for what they thought was a simple, commemorative picture were unknowingly providing Turkish intelligence with detailed facial identification for future persecution. Dr. Melkonian's research team traced Major Nazım's subsequent movements through military records and survivor testimonies. In March 1915, just weeks after the photograph was taken, Turkish forces launched coordinated raids on Armenian villages throughout the region. The operations showed remarkable precision. They targeted not just known revolutionaries, but also their relatives, friends, and anyone who had provided supplies or shelter. The raids began before dawn on March 15th. Turkish soldiers surrounded the village of Kizan, where several of the photographed revolutionaries had family connections. Using detailed lists of names and descriptions, they went door to door, arresting not just suspected resistance members, but entire family lines. Children as young as 12 were taken if they bore resemblance to the wanted fighters. Similar operations occurred simultaneously in Muş, Van, and Erzurum. The coordination suggested extensive preparation and intelligence gathering. Survivor accounts, recorded decades later by Armenian oral history projects, describe Turkish officers consulting photographs and detailed notes during the arrests. An elderly woman named Serpuhi Hagopian, interviewed in 1985 at age 93, recalled hiding in her cellar as Turkish soldiers searched her neighborhood. They had papers with pictures, she remembered. They would hold up the pictures and compare them to people's faces. They knew exactly who they were looking for. Another survivor, Hagop Berberian, testified that Turkish officers had shown him a photograph during his interrogation. They pointed to men in the picture and asked if I knew them, if I had seen them in our village. They wanted to know about their families, their friends, anyone who might have helped them. The enhanced 1915 photograph provided visual evidence supporting these testimonies. The Turkish intelligence operation had been far more systematic and extensive than previously documented. The revolutionary gathering, intended as a symbol of defiance, had inadvertently provided their enemies with a treasure trove of identifying information. But the story became even more disturbing as Dr. Melkonian's research continued. Cross-referencing the enhanced photograph with deportation records from 1915-1916, she discovered that almost every Armenian family connected to the photographed revolutionaries had been targeted during the subsequent genocide. Parents, siblings, wives, children, entire extended families were rounded up and sent on death marches into the Syrian desert. The precision was horrifying. In some cases, distant relatives who had not seen the revolutionary fighters for years were still identified and deported. Cousins who lived in completely different provinces were hunted down. The intelligence network that began with Major Nazım's surveillance operation had clearly expanded into a comprehensive system for tracking Armenian family connections. Traditional historical accounts of the Armenian genocide had focused on its broad scope and systematic nature, but this photograph provided evidence of the micro-level intelligence work that made such comprehensive persecution possible. It showed how individual acts of surveillance contributed to the larger machinery of genocide. The technological revelation also raised disturbing questions about other historical photographs. If this image had hidden such crucial information, for over a century, what other secrets might be lurking in historical archives? Dr. Melkonian began examining other photographs from the same period, applying similar digital enhancement techniques. The results were sobering. Several other images of Armenian gatherings, weddings, church services, community meetings, showed similar evidence of covert surveillance. Turkish observers could be found hiding in backgrounds, documenting faces and activities with the same systematic attention to detail. One particularly disturbing discovery involved a 1914 photograph of an Armenian wedding celebration in Harput. Digital enhancement revealed no fewer than 5 Turkish observers positioned around the celebration, photographing guests and making notes. Within 6 months, the groom's entire extended family had been deported. The bride was never seen again. Patton suggested that Ottoman intelligence operations against Armenian communities were far more pervasive and long-term than previously understood. The genocide of 1915-1916 was not a sudden explosion of ethnic hatred, but the culmination of years of careful surveillance, documentation, and preparation. As news of Dr. Melkonian's discoveries spread through academic and Armenian communities worldwide, the emotional impact was profound. Families who had treasured the 1915 photograph as a symbol of heroism now saw it as evidence of the systematic hunting of their ancestors. The image that had provided comfort and pride for generations now carried the weight of tragedy and betrayal. Some community members argued that the enhanced details should not be publicized, that they caused unnecessary pain and reopened old wounds. Others insisted that the truth, however difficult, must be documented and remembered. The debate reflected broader discussions within Armenian communities about how to commemorate the genocide while honoring the dignity of its victims. Dr. Melkonian herself struggled with the implications of her discovery. As a historian, she felt obligated to publish her findings and contribute to scholarly understanding of the period. As an Armenian American whose own great-grandparents had survived the genocide, she was deeply affected by the personal dimensions of the evidence. In her published research, she wrote, "This photograph forces us to confront the systematic nature of the persecution our people faced. It shows that the genocide was not a chaotic explosion of violence, but a carefully planned operation supported by extensive intelligence gathering. The brave men who posed for this picture were not just fighting against oppression, they were being hunted with scientific precision." The revelation also had implications for contemporary discussions about genocide prevention and human rights monitoring. The photograph demonstrated how surveillance technologies, even primitive ones from 1915, could be used to facilitate mass persecution. In an age of digital surveillance and facial recognition software, the historical lessons seemed particularly relevant. International law specialists noted that the photograph provided new evidence for legal cases related to the Armenian genocide. The systematic intelligence gathering documented in the image supported arguments that the Ottoman government's actions met the legal definition of genocide as deliberate and planned destruction of a national group. Turkish authorities initially dismissed Dr. Melkonian's findings, claiming that digital enhancement could not reliably identify individuals or uniforms from century-old photographs. However, independent verification by multiple international teams of experts confirmed the basic accuracy of her analysis. The figure in the photograph was indeed a Turkish military officer conducting surveillance of the Armenian Revolutionary gathering. As the centennial of the Armenian genocide approached in 2015, the enhanced photograph became a powerful symbol in memorial events worldwide. It represented both the heroism of those who resisted and the systematic nature of the persecution they faced. Museums and memorial sites incorporated the image and its hidden story into their exhibitions about the genocide. The photograph also inspired new research into other aspects of Ottoman intelligence operations during the genocide period. Historians began examining military archives with fresh perspectives, looking for evidence of the systematic surveillance and documentation that the photograph had revealed. Their work uncovered additional evidence of coordinated intelligence gathering across the Ottoman Empire. One researcher, Dr. Taner Akçam of Clark University, used the photograph's revelations to re-examine Ottoman military communications from 1915. He discovered coded messages referring to photographic documentation and identification procedures that aligned perfectly with the surveillance activities shown in the enhanced image. The story of the photograph ultimately became a story about the power of technology to reveal hidden truths. For over a century, the image had served one purpose: to honor the memory of Armenian revolutionary fighters. Modern digital enhancement had revealed its second purpose: to document the systematic surveillance that contributed to their persecution. But perhaps most importantly, the photograph served as a reminder that history often contains layers of meaning that only become visible with time and technological advancement. The brave men who posed on that mountain in 1915 could never have imagined that their commemorative picture would eventually expose the intelligence operations directed against them. They could not have foreseen that modern technology would reveal their hunter hiding in the shadows behind them. The enhanced photograph stands as testament to both human courage and human cruelty. It shows men willing to die for their beliefs, posing proudly despite knowing the risks they faced. But it also shows the systematic, methodical approach their enemies took to hunting them down. The juxtaposition is both inspiring and heartbreaking. Today, the original glass plate resides in climate-controlled storage at the Armenian Patriarchate in Istanbul, its historical significance now fully understood. Digital copies have been distributed to museums and research institutions worldwide, ensuring that both the obvious and hidden stories it tells will be preserved for future generations. Dr. Melkonian continues her research, applying digital enhancement techniques to other historical photographs from the genocide period. Each new discovery adds another piece to the complex puzzle of how systematic persecution operates at the individual level. Her work has inspired similar projects examining other genocides and mass atrocities, using modern technology to reveal previously hidden evidence. The 1915 photograph ultimately teaches us that the past is never fully revealed, that new technologies can illuminate previously invisible truths. It reminds us that behind every act of persecution lies careful planning and systematic intelligence gathering. Most importantly, it honors both the courage of those who resisted oppression and the memory of those who paid the ultimate price for their defiance. The men who posed for that photograph knew they were documenting their commitment to freedom. They could not have known they were also documenting the surveillance system designed to destroy them. But in revealing both stories, the enhanced photograph ensures that their sacrifice will never be forgotten, and that the systematic nature of the persecution they faced will never be denied. In the end, the photograph that was meant to inspire future generations of Armenians has indeed fulfilled that purpose, but in ways far more complex and meaningful than its subjects ever imagined. It stands as proof that even in the darkest moments of history, truth has a way of eventually coming to light.